Hello, and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. On today's episode, we're talking about the disappearance and death of Matthew Leveson from Australia. When Matthew disappeared, people worried right from day one that it was something more sinister. Unfortunately, it would take almost 10 years before his remains were located due to a lot of lies. Let's begin. Matthew John Leveson was born December 12th, 1986, and is the second son to Mark and Faye Leveson. His older brother is Peter, and he has a younger brother as well named Jason. Matt was very well liked and came from a very loving home. When he later came out as gay, his parents weren't really surprised and were very supportive. It was never an issue at all. They loved him unconditionally, and Matt was able to be his fun-loving self without any judgment. Matthew had loads of friends and was really well liked by most people that he met. The only thing Matt's parents were ever concerned with when it came to their son was Matt's boyfriend, because there was a very large age gap between the two. Matt was dating a man by the name of Michael Atkins, who was 25 years older than Matt. So this made him 45 at the time of Matt's disappearance, while Matt was only 20 years old. And I do know there are a lot of times that relationships do work with very large age gaps. So Michael, the boyfriend, was a third Dan black belt in Jiu-Jitsu and ran a dojo in the 90s. But when he was with Matt, he was employed as a security guard at Sutherland Sports Club. Now, Michael had only been openly gay for about 4 to 5 years before meeting Matt in 2006. I couldn't find anything in regards to his previous relationships, but apparently his own mother still didn't know that he was gay. So perhaps Michael was sort of reliving that part of his life when he was younger and still in the closet. Even though Michael was so much older, it said that Michael really liked Matt's friends, and it didn't bother him at all that he was dating someone so much younger. Matt and Michael enjoyed going to the gym and going to Arc nightclub. They were also the type of people who would stay out until 5 or 6 in the morning, and they'd use ecstasy or other party drugs and then use Sunday as their day to recover. Matt also loved music and had a pretty large sound system in his car that was installed in the trunk and basically took over the entirety of that trunk. And this was the car of choice when going clubbing, and you'd sometimes see it parked in an alley near a Coles Express service station not far from Arc nightclub. Why was it parked down the alley? Well, oftentimes Michael and Matt would do drugs together in the car before going into the club, and occasionally they'd sell drugs from the car as well, as they were sort of small-scale suppliers for some of the regular club goers. On Saturday, September 22nd, 2007, Matt and Michael would go to Arc nightclub with a friend around midnight. Then around 2:20 a.m., CCTV footage would show that Michael and Matt left the club, which was a bit unusual because they'd usually like to stay out much, much later than that. The following Tuesday, September 25th, Matt didn't show up to work. Matt had been working at a call center Tuesdays to Saturdays and had a good relationship with his colleagues there. It was unusual for Matt to miss work or not call them to inform them of any type of absences. So Matt's employers would call Matt's parents' house to find out where he was. And his parents' house was listed as his contact information as it wasn't updated when he moved in with Michael. His brother Jason answered the phone, telling them that he wasn't home, but he would try and locate him. Jason then called their mom, Faye, telling her that Matt didn't show up to work. Faye then called Michael, Matt's boyfriend, and was told that Matt had woken up and gone to work that morning. Faye would then try and call Matt's cell phone to see if he'd pick up, but he didn't. I'm sure this was quite alarming for everyone, but Matt had gone missing before. Back in August of 2006, Matt was reported missing after his parents hadn't heard from him for almost a week. Turns out Matt had actually moved in with Michael and just failed to call home. When Matt realized how frightening it was for his parents, he did promise never to do that ever again. And Michael would bring that up and tell Faye that Michael was probably fine because he had a history of not calling. Matt's parents didn't really like that answer. They knew that something wasn't right and nobody knew where Matt was. So Matt's parents would ask Michael to go to the police station and file a missing persons report with them. Michael did go that night to the station, and he said to the officers that Matt and him had a tiff about leaving Arc nightclub early on Saturday. But they did spend Sunday at home together, and he thought everything was okay.
And I fell asleep on the lounge, watching sort of TV, and woke up a little while later, and he wasn't home. So I sent him a text and said, where are you, whatever. And I didn't really worry about it too much because he doesn't work on Mondays.
Yeah.
And he's got, a group of friends that he, goes out with.
Yeah. What happened on Sunday? What time did you wake up?
In the afternoon sometime, about 2 o'clock or something. 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And then we sort of just had, lazy Sunday afternoon, really.
Did you wake up together?
Yeah, pretty much, I think.
Yeah.
Sunday night, he said that Matt went to Arc nightclub without him, and Michael hadn't seen him since. This would be the first questionable thing Michael said, because he told Matt's parents that Matt had woken up and gone to work Tuesday morning. 2 days later, on Thursday the 27th, Matt's car was located by police at Waratah Oval in Sutherland near the washrooms. Nothing was found in his car but some food wrappers on the floor and a receipt in the trunk. It wasn't noted right away, but Matt's stereo was also missing from the trunk of his vehicle. The receipt that was found inside the car was from Bunnings Warehouse, showing the purchase of a mattock and duct tape at 12:20 p.m. Sunday, September 23rd. And that was when Matt and Michael were supposed to be relaxing at home before he went missing. Friends were starting to really worry that something bad had happened to Matt. Police did ask Michael if he went to Bunnings Warehouse, and he lied and said no, that he'd never gone to Bunnings. During a search of the men's home, police seized Michael's car and his cell phone. And at this point, Michael received legal advice not to speak with police anymore. Investigators would find that the last known communication was a text message that Matt sent to a friend around 3:30 a.m. Sunday, which would have been a little under an hour after Matt and Michael had left the club early. But there was no indication that he was going anywhere but home. There was also several text messages sent while they were clubbing as well. One from Michael to Matt saying, quote, "I've said sorry 3 times, end quote. Michael claims he does not remember sending that message or denies ever arguing with Matt at Arc. While investigating the home, police also found an empty shoebox with a receipt from Monday the 24th when Matt was missing. Michael would be wearing a new pair of shoes. He had never informed police of shopping when he was going over his timeline. When asked where his old shoes went, he couldn't remember and he couldn't find them. It said that Michael was calling and texting Matt's phone, pleading for Matt to call him or his mom, and telling him that he loved him and was really concerned. But police found Matt's phone hidden under the front passenger side of Michael's floor mat. How did Matt's phone get into Michael's car? CCTV footage outside Arc nightclub would also show Matt and Michael leaving. But it would then show Michael re-entering the club around 3:15 a.m. by himself. Police would request the CCTV footage from Bunnings Warehouse, and it showed Michael entering the store, making a purchase, and then walking out of the store carrying a mattock.
He went to a Bunnings hardware store and purchased a mattock and duct tape with the express purpose of using that equipment to dispose of Matt's body.
This contradicts what Michael told police. According to his first statement, Michael and Matt went home after leaving Arc nightclub early, and while Matt was angry about leaving, he seemed fine later. They stayed home Sunday and had been lying on the couch watching TV when he thinks he fell asleep around 8:30 p.m. When he woke up later, around 1 a.m., Matt was gone. Michael assumed he went to Arc nightclub again because Matt was still slightly annoyed that they had left early the night before. So it seemed Michael was lying. And finally, on August 2nd of 2008, Michael was arrested and charged with Matt's murder. After an 8-week jury trial, Michael would be acquitted of all charges. And this is what I hate about the justice system and the courts. It's not just Australia. This happens in the US and Canada too. It's the pre-trials that have the lawyers fight about what can and cannot be used as evidence, what testimony can be submitted, what documents. And in this case, it was the evidence where Michael denied ever going to Bunnings' warehouse. This was excluded because of a loophole saying that Michael was never told he was a suspect when he denied going to Bunnings. So that wasn't able to be used in court, and this was the smoking gun that prosecutors had that showed how he lied and is covering something up. Everything else was just small circumstantial evidence. I couldn't find the trial documents, but I would assume he was also acquitted because there was no body, so no real proof that Matt was indeed dead. In fact, later on during an inquest in 2016, Michael suggested that Matt was probably still alive and maybe living in Thailand. Michael would be asked what happened again, and Michael would say that Matt was struggling with depression and seemed distant the month prior to his disappearance. He would also say that he didn't believe it was him at Bunnings' warehouse buying duct tape and a mattock. Then he would refuse to speak again. This would be a huge blow to Matt's family. They would push for an inquest because they wanted to know where Matt was and what really happened. And from what I read, it's very rare for an inquest to happen after someone's acquitted, but on January 15th, 2015, an inquest would begin in the disappearance of Matt Leveson. I love that about Australia. They're inquests. It's a court hearing, basically like another trial, but without charges or arguments, and is really just about gathering information so the coroner can find the cause or circumstances around someone's death. There is no jury, but the coroner usually is assisted by police or lawyers, and witnesses come back and testify under oath again for any relevant information. Nothing is excluded, unlike a court hearing. In Michael's indictment, he says they left the club early because Matt was too high on drugs and falling asleep in the club. He went on to say that when they got back to the car, Matt sat in the passenger seat and immediately fell asleep. Matt would wake up on the drive home and was not very happy and wanted to go back to the club. But remember, there were text messages sent while at the club from Michael to Matt asking where he was. One at 1:15 and another at 2:15 saying, quote, "I said sorry 2 times," end quote. And lastly, a text that said, quote, "I need more jollies, I sold out," and oh, person's name, too. "I'm near the cloakroom," end quote. The last one was right before they left the club. So how did Michael know that Matt was sleeping when he wasn't even with Matt? The CCTV footage would also show them walking out perfectly fine. Peter, Matt's older brother, who was also at Arc nightclub as well, saw Matt around 1:30 a.m. When Peter tried to say hi to Matt, Matt would respond with, "I don't want to talk." Peter then saw Michael and asked how it was going, to which he replied, "Not good," and further said that Matt was in, quote, "one of his moods," end quote. I'm not sure what that means, but I could only assume that Matt was bothered by something. Peter remembers that Matt did seem as though he was on drugs, but not incoherent. When Matt and Michael would leave, Michael said that they went straight home, which contradicts what the CTV video shows, where Michael returns at 3:15 a.m. Michael also hasn't fully admitted that it was him on the CCTV footage, even though he was positively identified. There were food wrappers found in the vehicle, and those wrappers were from Kohl's service station, where they often park their car. Unfortunately, nobody looked into that further, so we don't know who entered the store. If CCTV footage has both Michael or Matt on camera, but we do know for sure that the vehicle was parked near Kohl's and someone bought food. The last known contact Matt had with anyone was 3:30 a.m. Matt received a text from a friend saying, "Hey babe, where are you?" Matt replied about 15 minutes later saying, quote, "Mike's having a fucking cry. He is taking me home and won't let me stay. Fucking cunt," end quote. The friend would reply with, "Oh shit, that's not good," at 3:31 a.m. Matt would then say, quote, "He needs to get over himself," end quote. And the friend replied with, "Oh well, I'm sure you'll be all right." Michael also returned to the club at 3:15 a.m., and this was the same time Matt was texting with his friend. So was Michael using Matt's phone, or was Matt still alive and texting with his friend? I mean, if Matt wanted to be at the club so badly, why didn't he come back with Michael? Or was he sitting in the car waiting for Michael? In one of the first police interviews, Michael had told police that Matt did not need assistance to get out of the car and that Matt entered the apartment on his own. Michael would then go into the kitchen to get something to eat, and they would go to bed together at 5 a.m. In the inquest, Michael had said Matt went into the bedroom when they got home, but Michael did not check on him because he wanted to give Matt some space. Now, if Matt was out of it, according to him, why would Michael give him space? Wouldn't he be making sure Matt was okay? Michael also changed his story a few times, saying that he slept on the couch to he slept in the bed, then back to sleeping on the couch, and then finding Matt in the bedroom. He just can't seem to get his story straight. Also, according to Michael, that night he had taken one pill of E around 12 a.m. and Matt took one around 1 a.m. And typically Matt took 2 to 3 pills and sometimes additional vials of GHB. So if he had only one pill that was significantly less than his typical dose, this goes against Michael saying that Matt was manky and too high and falling asleep in the club. Back on January 29th of 2008, Matt's parents had even asked Michael if he could have possibly overdosed. And Michael said no, he didn't think so because Matt was very careful with his drug doses. And in regards to Matt and Michael's relationship, Michael would say they sometimes argued, but their relationship was good overall. In regards to Matt and Michael's relationship, Michael would say they sometimes argued, but their relationship was overall good. They were not having any problems, but anyone close to Matt would say otherwise. A work colleague of Matt said that Matt had recently said he was going to stand up to Michael and he was unhappy and wanted to end it. He also implied that Michael was being possessive and controlling. He was feeling smothered by Michael and couldn't do anything on his own. So about a week prior to Matt's disappearance, Matt went to Arc nightclub with a friend without Michael. And Matt and his friend were meeting other friends there and they just didn't invite him. Michael ended up following them in his car and stayed with them at Arc nightclub for a while, but left as he had to work the next day. Apparently, Michael often tried to instigate a threesome with one of their friends, and Matt didn't like the idea. It just made him uncomfortable. According to one witness, they did in fact engage in a threesome about a week prior to his disappearance. The witness was the third person. But Matt started to act very distant after that, and this witness was worried that it ruined their friendship. After the incident, Michael also told this witness that if it weren't for Matt, that Michael would be with him instead. Jason, Matt's brother, also said that back on September 7th of 2007, Matt and Michael had attended a family function, and during this family event, Jason would say Michael pushed Matt really hard. And this wasn't the first time Michael was physical with Matt. Matt's friend had seen Michael punch Matt hard in the arm when Matt was just teasing him. Even though Michael claims their relationship was very loving and close, Michael had been having online relations via webcam through gay chat rooms. Michael had told one of the participants that he was 35 and in an open relationship. This same participant met up with Michael on Tuesday the 25th, just 2 days after Matt was reported missing. He claims Michael wasn't showing any emotions about Matt being missing, and they would have sex and go to a nightclub afterwards. Michael was also texting with 2 other men in the afternoon of Monday the 23rd, looking for a date. Then had used Matt's laptop and went on a manhunt website on the Sunday after returning home from Bunnings Warehouse. Police did ask him about the usage of Matt's computer, but he strangely couldn't remember. Michael was also having a hard time remembering where they parked Matt's car from returning home from the club. He had no idea whatsoever. When asked if he was familiar with the location where the car was found, he said he wasn't familiar with that area, but that was a lie because he used to manage a vending machine near the basketball stadium. And remember, Matt's car also had a very large stereo, but the stereo was missing when they found Matt's car. It was later found in the garage during the investigation. And Michael said he could not recall why or how the stereo got into the garage. Peter, Matt's brother, suspects that the stereo needed to be removed from the trunk in order to transport Matt's body. On November 10th, 2016, police would launch a full-scale search to try and find Matt's body, even though up until this point, Michael was still saying that Matt could be in Thailand. In the investigators' last effort to get information from Michael requested immunity from perjury or contempt of court if he gave the location to where he thought Matt's remains were located. And the police agreed to this as long as Matt's remains were located. Matt's parents also had to make the hardest decision to also sign off on this. Even though it meant that charges wouldn't be put forward, all they wanted to do was bring Matt home. Michael then came up with another new statement saying that Matt had died in their bedroom, and he assumed Matt overdosed because he found a bottle of GHB on the counter. And Matt must have free-poured it and overdosed by accident because he was usually really careful. Michael then panicked and hid Matt's body. Michael would also deny doing much drugs as Matt and said Matt was the one who did all the drugs and sold the drugs, blaming everything on Matt. However, a witness who was referred to as Ms. White said Matt was sometimes indulgent, but she never saw him being dangerous or out of control. Police had found quite a bit of GHB in the apartment during their initial search. It was apparently in small fish-shaped soy sauce containers. And we don't have those soy sauce containers in Canada, but from what I've read, these vials actually help people not to overdose, as it can perfectly hold 2 doses. So if they had these vials and knew how to measure correct doses, and Matt was usually really careful, how did Matt end up overdosing? Michael did end up taking the police to the Royal National Park and showed police where he buried Matt. And this search would be called off after 8 days because there was no evidence of Matt's remains found anywhere. And this search ended up covering 4,000 square meters with no leads. So then on May 22nd, 2017, police brought Michael back to the original site again and asked that Michael reenact carrying Matt's body. They even used a mannequin and had tried hypnosis to relax him. Michael then thought he must not have gone so deep in the bush, and maybe it was closer to the road where he parked the car. After searching for another week, on May 31st, in the last hour of daylight, a large cabbage palm was uprooted and Matt's remains were finally recovered. After all that, Matt's death was recorded as undetermined because they couldn't really tell what happened. After so many years of decomposition and possible damage from the excavator, it was impossible to know if any injuries to the bones were post-mortem or peri-mortem. Unfortunately, they also couldn't do toxicology to confirm if Matt actually overdosed, as per Michael's latest statement. In the inquest, the coroner did agree that due to all the lies and inconsistencies, the evidence supports finding that Michael was involved in Matt's death. And Matt's parents feel that maybe Matt could have been smothered or strangled to death, but that also can't be proven. The worst part of all of this is now Matt's parents have to live with Matt's killer roaming around free, and they still have zero answers as to what really happened to their son. My thoughts? What a nightmare for Matt's family. It took 9.5 years for Matt's parents to finally have Matt's body and finally grieve. All because of lies Michael told. I know Michael obviously only came clean because of the deal that was made, but it just doesn't sit well with me. Matt's parents did agree to the deal, but I feel like they were sort of backed into a corner. They wanted to grieve and have Matt back, and it probably felt like the only solution at the time. How terrible that they had to deal with all those lies for so many years. And honestly, I don't believe Michael that it was an accidental overdose. Most people call 911 if they find their partner dead, unless of course you're covering something up. And the fact that he kept on dating and meeting new people before Matt was even reported missing, that man, I hope he lives a terrible life and never finds happiness. What do you guys think? Was justice served? Is it okay that he's free because he gave up Matt's location? That's it for today. Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator, and we will see you soon.